Yeah.
If you were starting, or if you had a business at the moment and you wanted to employ capsule services, and they said, we've got a load of data already, or we can start capturing additional data. Obviously, data is probably one of the largest parts of being able to predict and quality of data. What kind of advice would you give to organizations thinking about moving into AI ML world?
So I think it definitely depends on your approach. So I think one of the big benefits that ChatGPT has is that there's essentially kind of no wrong answer or no labeling of the data. There's just people talking on the internet, and that's what it consumes. And essentially, talking on the internet is talking validly on the internet. It's it's just people speaking. It causes problems for them because people say bad stuff, and then that ends up coming out of the model. So that they have to then do some relatively arbitrary work to stop that from happening. Arbitrary in the sense of not necessarily, it's not in the data that they're training on that these stops should be in place. So and that there's a huge benefit to ChatGPT because and transformer models of that sort in general. They don't have to really worry about cleanliness of data, I think, as a contrast to other kinds of things. So now other kinds of business that maybe aren't going to make use of an LLM, this is where I would want to give a much more specific bit of advice, which is that essentially it is, of course, very good to collect data. The more scientifically you treat that process as a discipline, the better result you will get, is my view. Because it all comes down to the data. Like your model speaks the data, essentially. So if you have some kind of distinction clearly in your data between elements of your data, then the model should be able to find that. So if you're doing classification, for example, if you have very well labeled data and you're doing a classification problem, then your classifier will be able to distinguish these things, or very likely, at least, if you have enough data. And it's old hat these days, just shove XGBoost on data with good labels, it will perform well. But what does it mean to be scientific about your data? I think it really does mean you are a scientist and you are collecting data. Be as rigorous about that as a scientist would be in their particular area of expertise. So if you want to collect data and then you want to have labels for that data, then let's say you want to collect data and you want to label it in terms of behavior in that data. You really want the label to be as clean as possible, and you really want to know that you are labeling the behaviors that you wish to when you're generating your labels. If you are intending to label behavior, but you actually end up labeling another thing, which is perhaps, maybe you label in terms of the mechanism by which you recorded the data, which is not the process which generates that data, then you are essentially labeling something different. That label is qualitatively different, and that is going to have an effect on how we as an organization can make that data work for you. So that's what I'd say, basically. And it's difficult. It's legitimately extremely difficult. I would perhaps go as far to say that if you can afford it, just have a scientist on staff, have it be their problem. They are literally trained in this. This is their job to a large extent. So I think that's it. You get the most value from really clean stuff. And obviously there are a lot of problems in the world where they're just not going to get that. Most of the time, I think it's also fine to just accept you're going to have dirty data and to not, worry too much about that. At least having data is way, way better than having nothing.
Yep.
And then, you can lean on the expertise of your data science team, and, help. They can help you, and you can help them to get it where it needs to be.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Actually, I see so many organizations that either just collect everything or collect kind of general operation information, and then they'll kind of go, we've got all this valuable data, and actually really it's not worth anything. But I think again, there's always a tendency to kind of think we do any insight work retrospectively based on what we've got, as opposed to bringing it right front and center, and maybe turning it on its head to think about the value of the data up front.
I absolutely, yeah. I think that's a really good point. Like I think you always want to be directed with this, and I think actually I would just say this is more like a principle thing, like a business thing. You should always have a mission. There should be a purpose behind what you're doing. If you just randomly collect data, it might be useful, but chances are it's just not actually going to fit into the format that you need when you realize what it is that you need. So you want to do that work up front. You want to say, what do I want? That's what mission is. What do I want? And then when you know what you want, asking, how do I get it?
Mm-hmm.
And working it backwards from there. And if you do that, I think you can just say like, oh, I want to recognize these kinds of behaviors that are occurring somewhere in the data that's related to my business. Then you've got a really clear idea of like, what do I need to collect? And not only that, you've got a really clear message that you can communicate to somebody else, somebody whose role it might actually be to do that work, so that they can go do it. Rather than just, as you say, right, just collecting everything and then just kind of basically hoping that there's value in that when there probably almost certainly isn't.
Yeah, I mean, you see kind of people posting about, data's worth more than gold and things now. But again, some of it is. But I think there's a lot of data that's collected that has no value whatsoever. But I think going back to kind of the infancy, of a kind of data science itself, and then also technology on top of that, I think it's probably going to take quite a long time to filter through, and all the scaremongering that we see. And recently we've had these people it's been suggested they've signed this paper to say, they're going to, and then everybody's kind of backtracking saying they've not signed it, which is quite interesting. All the scaremongering. It still feels, I think, a long way until we start to get genuinely useful intelligence within applications. I think there are some organizations that are doing it, but like you say, they've brought it in 10 years ago, and it's at the forefront of what they do, and they work and behave differently. But everyone now, I think, feels that that's what all their competitors are doing, and doing well, because of the way it's communicated on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's just I think it requires a mentality, for it. But it's almost a tautology to even say that. I think it basically, business is mentality. Everything about it requires like a mentality towards it, and you're just leaving yourself, I think, very open to being beaten in whatever you're trying to do if you don't take seriously the idea that you need to have whatever the mentality it is that is required to do X or Y thing. And that just goes for every single part of it. If you don't have the mentality for sales, maybe you won't sell. Maybe you will, maybe you get lucky, but probably won't. If you don't have the mentality towards engineering, you won't do that. And I guess this is what, something that makes it just so hard in the modern era. There's a lot less slack these days. People are really like, working hard on this. So everything's tightening up. So you've really got to work hard to be different or to be better. And you just got to do all of these things. There's just no two ways about it.